Hello and welcome. You're watching Coronavirus Facts versus Myths. I'm Rishika Barwa. Let's get you up to speed with India's COVID figures first. With 29,689 new cases in the last 24 hours, India has reported less than 30,000 daily cases for the first time in 132 days. But this case decline comes with a rider that only 11 lakh people have actually been tested for COVID in this time. There have been 415 deaths. Vaccinations, however, have jumped in this time period. 66.03 lakh people have been vaccinated in the country in the last 24 hours, and this is the highest since the 21st of June. So is the dip in cases and the rise in vaccinations really a reason to celebrate? Well, I'm afraid not. The R factor, the reproduction rate or the rate at which the virus transmits, is now at 0.99. It is inching closer to the 1 mark. Now, this is a huge cause of concern. Why? Because India's reproduction rate of COVID-19 cases has been on a steady decline, as you can see from that graphic on your screen. 4 weeks ago, it was around 0.87. It rose to 0.95 only a week ago, and now you can see it is inching closer to 1. Does this, in a certain sense, indicate that cases are now all set to rise again in India? That's an important question that we'll be asking on the show today. Meanwhile, let's take a look at the state-wise breakup. Well, it is Kerala, the state that's reporting the biggest spike in coronavirus cases, followed by Maharashtra. So about 11,000 daily cases being reported in Kerala and around 4,800 in Maharashtra. 40% of India's cases since the 20th of July have been from Kerala. The total positivity rate in Kerala is worrying. It's crossed 11% as of July the 19th. And Kerala is among the states that's actually vaccinating the fastest. It's actually got one of the best fully vaccinated percentages in the country at 14.7%. So 14.7% of fully vaccinated people in Kerala, and yet it is the state that is reporting the biggest spike in cases. How really should we be looking at this? What should we make of it? Dr. Riju John joins us. He is a professor at the Rajagiri College of Social Sciences, Kochi. He's also a health economist and guest faculty at IIM Kozhikode. Thanks so much for being with us. I want to begin by asking you about, before we get into the details about what's happening in Kerala, I want to very quickly get your reaction on the R, which is at 0.99% today. Steady rise as far as the reproduction rate is concerned. How are you looking at this?
Well, I think it is still a bit early to comment on. Our active case load at the national level is not really rising significantly. Of course, the growth of it has been on a negative growth for quite some time, but that negative growth itself has been reducing, which means we are almost replacing the same number of cases on a daily basis as the number of recoveries at the moment. So it's still a bit early to suggest any surge at the national level. Obviously, Kerala is reporting a little bit higher numbers, but so far at the moment, it's mostly Kerala and some of the northeastern states that are still seeing a rise in numbers, but nowhere else in the country. So I guess it's a bit early to be panicky or.
No, Dr. John, I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to Kerala in just a bit, because I do want to ask you. It's very confusing that the R is at 0.99%. Cases are below 30,000 in the country. Active cases in the country as of today are below 4 lakhs. This is also happening for the first time in 100 odd days. How should we be looking at this?
Well, active cases, cases are a little bit fluctuating these days. It went below 4 lakh and again it went up above 4 lakh. In the last couple of days, it's been, like as I said, we are replacing it with the exact same number of recoveries almost. So I wouldn't worry too much at the moment, because I don't really see any definitive trend that is, a trend of rising cases anywhere in the country except in Kerala and northeastern states. So that's still part of the existing wave that is happening, I believe.
Okay.
So yeah.
Right. Well, we also have Dr. Shashank Joshi, member of the COVID-19 task force from Maharashtra, joining us. Dr. Joshi, I'd also like to begin by asking you about the R effect, which is currently inching closer to 1. Does this mean cases are all set to rise in India again?
Rishika, at this juncture, it doesn't appear that that may be true.
Okay.
There are two issues we need to look at. One is Kerala is clearly an outlier, and the number going up there is a cause of concern because that's where COVID starts and the wave starts from India, number one. Number two, Maharashtra clearly has come down, but there is a monsoon masking. All the districts of concern in Maharashtra are flooded, unfortunately, are going through a very bad monsoon time. So whether that will be a masking effect, because the number of tests overall in India are down. Clearly, the second wave is over as far as north of India is concerned. And but for these 5 geographies which you have listed out, definitely the trends are that the second wave is now on its final stages. And the thick tail has started thinning out with the only exception of Kerala. So this R factor, though seems to be at 0.99 as a cause of concern, I currently would not worry it for the next 2 to 4 weeks. But every 2 weeks we have to see the trend. And the current trend is that I would be cautiously optimistic.
All right, but if we can focus then on Kerala specifically, and I'll ask both of you this question. Dr. John, to you first, why is Kerala the outlier?
Well, first, Rishika, first of all, I would like to clarify that, I don't really agree with the suggestion that the second wave started in Kerala. That is not that's not in accordance with the data. I have been tracking data across every state. You can see that the state at the national level, the second wave cases started surging around first week of February, and by March or end of February, early March, or nearly a dozen states had seen surge in cases. But whereas Kerala started experiencing a surge or its second wave only in the first week of towards the end of March, actually, and early April.
Okay.
So it was more than a month and a half since other cases.
But why is Kerala the outlier currently, despite this high rate of vaccination, Dr. John?
I have a very clear response to that also. If you we have to clearly observe the seroprevalence survey that came from ICMR in its 4th sero survey data that came recently. It was published a few days back, according to which the seroprevalence at the national level is 67.6%, whereas the same seroprevalence in Kerala was only 42.7%. So which clearly means that Kerala has almost 50% or more of its current population is still vulnerable or susceptible, where they have not been infected, whereas the same proportion is only 30% in the country. So clearly, when you look at the data, it's very clear to me that Kerala has been following a very slow-paced spread actually compared to the national level, and that's obvious from the very low seroprevalence compared to the national average. So obviously, which means you have a continued and sustained prevalence in Kerala, and you have a continued sustained cases.
So if I can understand very simply what you're saying, at the risk of oversimplifying it, you're essentially saying that just not enough percentage of population in Kerala has developed immunity to COVID as compared to what the national average is. Is that your argument?
Absolutely.
Dr.
It
Joshi,
is much lower, almost 25 percentage point difference between national average and the state seroprevalence. That's a lot.
Okay. Dr. Joshi, would you agree with that assessment?
So that is partly true, that their level of exposure is lower than rest of the country, and they have a higher exposure, which means they have less exposed or unexposed population, which is now more susceptible or vulnerable. So that part of it is correct. But the second part is that Kerala did see, after their local general body elections, somewhere in mid-Jan to mid-February, a spike, after which they started a national collaborative for genomic testing. They went very aggressive on tightening their guard, and after tightening of their guard, they actually then delayed that initial part of the second wave.
Right.
That is very clear cut, and they definitely again need to tighten up their guard or look at any mutation which is happening. So they need to do more sero surveys, they need to do more genomic prevalence, and they need to vaccinate more.
Right.
That's clear cut as far as Kerala is concerned, because it is still the thorn in the overall decline which India is seeing.
Okay. Quick comment, Dr. Joshi, from you on Maharashtra as well. You make a very interesting point when you say that there appears to be monsoon masking because of the flooding. Do you believe that the testing has dipped, and we will, once the monsoon fury is over, we'll see a huge spike in Maharashtra. Are you anticipating that?
We may anticipate that because it has been a very sad and a disastrous monsoon flooding in all the districts and geographies of concern which were red flagged out. For example, Ratnagiri, Raigad, as well as Sindhudurg, Satara and Sangli and Kolhapur, all are underwater. And when they are underwater, lot of people are running for shelter. There is going to be congregation and there is likelihood of higher transmission as the floods abate. Most of the national highways are closed, access there is closed, and that is why it is a big cause of concern. The Department of Health, Dr. Pradeep Vyas and his team is very concerned, and we are all very concerned that there should not be a rebound after the floods start receding.
All right. Well, thank you both very much for joining us. It's an extremely important conversation. We're looking at the overall India picture and also specifically looking at the two states that are currently reporting the first and the second highest number of cases in the country. Thank you very much, Dr. Joshi and Dr. John, for joining us on this edition of Facts versus Myths. We're going to shift our focus, though, now to the Northeast, where there's been an extremely interesting development that we're reporting on. India has essentially reported its first documented case of a dual COVID infection in the Northeast. Now, this has been reported in a double vaccinated doctor from Assam. This doctor was infected by both the Alpha and the Delta variants of COVID. Now, there have been a few of these incidents in the UK, in Brazil, in Portugal, but as such, a case like this hasn't been officially documented here in India. What does a dual COVID infection really mean? Dr. Borka Koti, senior scientist at the ICMR's Regional Medical Research Center, joins us from Dibrugarh. Thanks very much, Dr. Borka Koti, for joining us. What is a dual infection? What does this dual COVID even mean?
Thank you so much. At the onset, I would say in medical terms, when we say it's a co-infection, but co-infection with the same virus with a different strain. Generally, co-infection, we have a lot of, it's a common thing, co-infection to occur for respiratory virus like influenza with COVID-19 or RSV with influenza. It's a common factor, and in medical science, it's a common thing to have a co-infection. But what we are seeing out here is a dual infection or co-infection with the same virus, but with different variants. And why is it rare? Actually, it shouldn't be rare. It is a surprise that people are not detecting a lot of co-infection with different variants. The surprise is that we fail to detect these variants, and we are not looking at it. And these variants are generally detected during the transition phase of one variant replacing the other. And this transition phase, suppose the UK variant was very common in February, March, and early part of April in India, and most probably in Northeast India, actually. And then came the Delta variant that was originally formerly known as the Indian variant. So during that phase, simultaneously, two variants people may get infected with two variants simultaneously within a very short of period of time, maybe 1 week.
Right. That's actually the clarity that I want from you. Is it a simultaneous infection? Are you have symptoms of COVID, but you're infected with two variants parallelly? Does it happen simultaneously, or does one sort of follow the other?
It is a simultaneous infection, and in fact, one will overtake the other. The one which have a higher transmissibility and higher reproduction, I mean to say the replication rate, and they will be the dominant strain. Actually, what happened is that the UK variant, that is the Alpha variant, that is what we call the B1.117.
Right.
That variant was highly transmissible. It was more than 60% transmissible than the Clade Z.
Yes.
Earlier.
How is it diagnosed? Dr. Borka Koti, how is it diagnosed? Because this is one documented case, but you're saying that in that period between the Alpha variant and then the Delta variant taking over, there could have been several such people who could have had a dual COVID?
Yes. What we do in RT-PCR, we do not detect the variants. We just detect the positive and the negative. So it's the same virus. Actually, the Alpha and the Delta variant, they don't differ. They hardly differ by 0.2%, not even 0.2%, even they are similar, 99.8% they are similar. So the virus is the same. Some mutations are there, at least in the spike protein, they have around non-synonymous mutation that is sends in the amino acid sequence of around 8 amino acid sequence from the reference strain.
Right.
So what we get out here is that this virus is the same, the strains are different, and if we are not looking at the whole genome sequencing, even whole genome sequencing misses these variants because they appear. We have to look specifically at the point of interest.
Right. Will the disease, I'm going to interrupt you there because we're running out of time, but will the disease be the same if you have a dual infection? Will the symptoms of this kind of COVID also be the same?
It's the same virus and you will have the same disease actually. The Delta variant, because it will predominant because its replication rate is higher or its transmissibility higher.
Okay.
When you have a virus that is circulating, then already we get a lot of things like the quasi-virus species circulation in HIV and other viruses also.
All right.
So there may be some differences, but this is not a thing to worry about.
Okay.
It's like the single infection, whatever you get with Delta infection, you will get with
well, it's fascinating information, and thank God you're saying it's nothing really to be worried about.
It's nothing to worry about.
But the first dual case of COVID being detected there in the Northeast. Thanks so much, Dr. Borkakotty, for joining us.
Thank you.
With that information. Thanks so much. We're going to slip into a very short break, but up next we'll answer your questions on the COVID-19 vaccine. Dr. Deepu TS will be live with us. Welcome back onto our special campaign, Vaccinate India, in partnership with Google, where we look to answer questions you may be Googling about the coronavirus vaccine. Dr. Deepu TS, Clinical Associate Professor, Department of Internal Medicine, Amrita Hospitals, Kochi, joins us. Thanks so much, Doctor, for being with us. Does the presence of antibodies mean that a person is immune to COVID?
Of course, the presence of antibody means that definitely the person, that particular individual, have some protection against the COVID-19. But whether it will, what is the amount of protection that antibody is going to provide to that particular individual is the question. For example, we definitely know if we, in our follow-up studies, depending upon the different vaccines which is available in the market, the protection varies from 70% to 95% in case of mRNA vaccine. So definitely there is a protection factor, and also more than that, if I am from Kerala, so if we are just taking the zero surveillance which has happened during the end of 2020, it was just 10%, and last month ICMR has revealed the zero surveillance, and it is almost like 50% in Kerala. In India, I think it is 65%. So, and what is as far as a clinician is concerned, what is the reflection of that kind of antibody response in our clinical practice? So what we are seeing is that during that initial period, we used to see much more complicated cases, severe cases of COVID-19 in elderly population. But since our vaccination mainly targeted, the target group was mainly more than 60. So the majority of the people who got vaccinated is like more than 60 and more than 45. So the number of severe cases in that particular group is definitely on the low.
Okay, and is there a difference between infection-induced antibodies and vaccine-induced antibodies?
Definitely infection-induced antibody will be more of a polyclonal type. Even the vaccine-induced antibody is also of a polyclonal type, but the spectrum of the antibody response against the whole virus will be definitely likely to be more in case of an infection per se compared to the vaccine.
All right.
So that's why just to add a point, in the patients who are getting recurrent infection is kind of low compared to the patient who are getting vaccine escaped mutant infection.
All right,
so that is again.
All right, that's very interesting. I want to also ask you another very commonly asked question. Should mothers who have COVID be breastfeeding their infants?
Yeah, sure. Definitely mothers who have COVID-19 can breastfeed their child, but it would be better, it would be prudent from her part to take necessary precautions in the form of cleaning hands, then cleaning the breast, and then wearing mask during the breastfeeding. So if that can be done, then definitely there is no issue in breastfeeding.
Right. And what about, transferring antibodies, say post-infection? Can antibodies be transferred through breastfeeding to the infant? Does that also happen?
Yeah, breastfeeding, while breastfeeding, the antibodies will get transferred to a certain amount, but whether that is enough to protect the baby from getting infection, that is still a gray area.
Right. And, what are the kind of protocols that new mothers should follow if they are infected with COVID? How can they protect their infant from getting the infection? How can they protect the infant from getting the infection from them if they've been infected?
Yeah. So again, as I told, the chance of when will we tell that a particular person is at high risk of getting a COVID-19? That is when, according to the WHO, it is more than 15 minutes of interaction in close quarters, and that too without wearing a mask. So this is the time where you will call that a particular individual is at high risk for getting the infection. So definitely minimize the interaction to the least possible. As we already discussed, just minimize the interaction to the breastfeeding time, and that with all the necessary precautions.
Essentially, it's the same COVID protocols really that need to be followed in this case as well. Thanks so much, Doctor, for joining us.
Thank you.